Hi, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Thank you so much for joining us today. Lots to talk about again this week. We'll talk about the election this coming Tuesday and whether some of the big names involved, like David Clark, Gwen Moore, Glenn Grothman, Marina Dmitrievich, are going to be the winners. We'll talk about Governor Scott Walker's campaign and whether it was a strategic mistake to criticize Mary Burke's association with the Trek Bicycle Company. And we'll wonder out loud who's going to have the greatest influence on where and when the new Milwaukee Bucks Arena gets built. All right, let me introduce everybody. Kevin Fischer, who spent many years as a broadcast journalist. And you know Denise Callaway, communications and public relations professional. And of course, Gerard Randall, education consultant, local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz is going to be along with commentary at the end of this show. All right, let's talk first about Tuesday's election. It will most likely be a pretty low turnout affair, but there are some big races. Chris Mays, a longtime Milwaukee police officer who has attracted some big outside money and support, takes on Milwaukee County Sheriff David Clark. Congresswoman Gwen Moore is facing former state senator Gary George, who wants her job. Milwaukee County Board Chairman Marina Dmitrievich is trying to get into the state legislature, and State Senator Glenn Grothman is trying to get into Congress by replacing the retiring Tom Petri. Is name recognition the most important factor in all of these races?
Well, name recognition will help. You've got races, let's take, for example, Sheriff Clark's race. There aren't a whole lot of folk who know Chris Mays or are aware of what his stances on certain issues might be, even though they spent a lot of money. Most of the money has been spent not defining him, but defining David Clark, or attempting to. I look at the race where you had 4 years ago with Sheriff Clark and Mays, and I think turnout in the African-American community is going to be significant, and that will determine who wins that race. I do believe that there are more people who are familiar with David Clark, the good and the bad, and that will, I think, help push him over the top. The race with Glenn Grothman, you've got 3 different areas within that congressional district, and within each one of those areas, there's popularity among particular candidates, and so it will come down again to turnout. If the senator can get his supporters in West Bend to come out and support him, I think that will be critical for him. And then, of course, Congresswoman Moore and Senator George, former Senator George, the Congresswoman will have far better name recognition and likability in that race, and even a better machine to turn out votes in her favor. So I don't see that race as being too terribly dramatic.
Talk radio is trying to persuade Republicans to vote in the Democratic primary for David Clark. I don't think a lot of Republicans are going to do that. Do you?
I don't think they are either. And to me, it makes me wonder whether or not there's some internal polling or some other information that the sheriff has that really shows that this race is much tighter against Chris Mays than it perhaps might appear to some folks. I do think Chris Mays has done a good job of defining himself. And some of it he certainly has done by drawing some stark contrast between himself and Sheriff Clark. But I also believe the information he's been sharing is really kind of relaying to people that perhaps the emperor has no clothes. He has said, and I think is very true, that David Clark is not tough on crime. David Clark is loud on crime. He has certainly drawn forward and reminded people the fact that this is a sheriff who has run deficits in his department. He is a sheriff who was overspent. He is a sheriff who has really not had any responsibility about fighting crime, and those opportunities he had to join others in the fight against crime, gun violence task force, the anti-drug unit, those are things that he's actually disbanded. So I think there is really a very stark contrast between these two individuals, and I think David Clark is a little worried. It's as we've sometimes talked in the past, when folks ask for a little mischief to be done, and that's exactly what you would find with Republicans voting in the Democratic primary, it's usually because people are worried.
Kevin, do you expect any surprises?
I really don't. Although I am less confident tonight than I was a few weeks ago about the David Clark race. And why wouldn't I be? I mean, they're throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, over $500,000 some people really don't like him, and I understand the establishment, the leftist establishment in this community hates the fact that a black conservative is in that position of power and is even talking the talk that needs to be talked.
Not the issue.
It's necessary. He's the only one. He's the only one showing leadership by saying, "Look, the status quo, the sitting back and doing nothing, isn't working. We need somebody to shake things up." And people don't like what he's saying. They don't like him. Kevin, they don't like him. They don't like the fact that he's a black conservative. So they're coming at him with over $500,000. And for a gentleman like Chris Mays, who wants to be the top law enforcer in the county, to take the position that he will not enforce the law against illegal immigrants is reprehensible. I think that disqualifies. I think that disqualifies. I didn't interrupt you, Denise. Welcome back. We're glad to have you, but I didn't interrupt you. But I see you haven't changed. So I don't see any surprises in the Glenn Grothman, Joe Leibum, Dewey Strobel race. Any one of those would be great. They're all Republicans that don't really differ all that much. But look at how Joe Leibum and Dewey Strobel are going after Glenn Grothman. That tells me that they think that he's the front runner. Marina Dmitrievich has the fact that she's county board chair going for her. And in a very liberal district, she's extremely liberal, and the others are also extremely liberal but don't have the name recognition she has. So I see her coming out of that, although I got to tell you, if she had somebody really formidable running against her, she'd be in trouble, especially after that Dan Bice article a few weeks ago that basically said she's not in the office all that much. So I think David Clark wins, maybe not by as much as maybe we thought he was going to win, because they're really, really coming after him. And I think Marina Dmitrievich pulls it off. And I think in the congressional race that Glenn Grothman wins there, and then he's got that job for life.
You know, I got to say something about David Clark, because
you don't like him.
To say that it's an issue of a black conservative is false. It is absolutely false. The issue is what David Clark has or hasn't done, and the things he has or hasn't said. Now, you talk about trying to draw a bright line between some support that Chris Mays has from Voices de la Frontera and some things he has said in the past, and he's saying he's not going to support the law.
Told them he won't.
Let me tell you. Let me tell you about somebody who has encouraged people not to follow the law, who has encouraged people to break the law, and that is Sheriff Clark. And he did it on the taxpayer dime when he's telling people, don't call 911. Take the law into your own hands.
How's that breaking the law?
That certainly is breaking the law. You're encouraging people not to take advantage of the systems that are in place.
If you don't call 911, you're breaking the law?
If you're going to decide you're going to shoot somebody, center mass, as he encouraged somebody to do.
That's your constitutional right.
It's not your constitutional right to shoot somebody. We have someone who has consistently used words to inflame rather than to try to change things. And it's not accurate, Kevin, to say that David Clark is the only person who's talked about doing anything. If you take a look at what the sheriff, at what the mayor's talked about, if you take a look at what the police chief has talked about, they certainly have talked about changes. The mayor's answer is blame Madison.
And give me more money.
That is your response to it. He hasn't. The thing that he's consistently asked for, the thing the police chief has consistently asked for, that Republicans have refused to do. It's not gun control. It's saying if you're somebody who's a felon who is carrying an illegal weapon, you should serve mandatory time. And Republicans in the legislature will not pass that. That does not cost a penny to do. All it does is let people know that as a state and community,
that's a page right out of the Blame Madison book.
All right,
that's not a reason to vote against David Clark.
Next topic.
There are lots of those.
Governor Scott Walker has taken a lot of heat for his criticism of Mary Burke's time with Trek Bicycle. Though the company makes most of its bikes overseas, it's still a very respected Wisconsin-based firm. Was this a tactical mistake by Team Walker?
No, it was not. It was a response in a campaign that everyone seems to believe is going to be very, very tight. Look, you can't have it both ways. You can't come out and blast the administration for giving financial assistance to companies that then outsource, but and then expect not some of the heat to come back when you're doing the same thing. 99% of your bicycles are being made over in China, where you are not paying a living wage. You're paying them $1.80 an hour. So you can, in a campaign, you can't say, well, we can go on the attack because you're doing this, but don't come after us for doing the same thing. He did not attack the company. He attacked the hypocrisy of a campaign. And anyone who thinks that this governor is overnight in the last couple of weeks gone anti-business is misinformed. This governor, not just in the recent campaign, but since day one, is out there every week touring companies all across the state that are having groundbreakings or ribbon cuttings or expanding their operations or bringing on more jobs. You don't hear about that in the daily newspaper. You don't hear about that on the lefty blogs. You don't hear about that in the mainstream media. So again, this was not a.
But it most certainly is.
This was not a tactical mistake, because to say he attacked a company is erroneous.
He's a very pro-business governor. I think most people would agree with that. But even the Wall Street Journal ripped him.
Well, and I don't have to say that it was a tactical error. I just have to turn to Ron Johnson, a fellow Republican, who said it was a mistake for the campaign to take the tack that they did against Mary Burke. So I don't need to argue that fact. I've got Ron Johnson telling him that it was the wrong thing to do. It was an attack on Trek. It certainly was. And I think that part of the reason you're not seeing those commercials anymore is because the blowback just didn't come from Ron Johnson, it came from other folks. If you want to talk about, and this is the thing that's so interesting, talk about what Mary Burke did. There are some ads that talk about that and question her judgment or some of her decisions as a commerce secretary. That's absolutely fine. But to go after someone, and I found it so odd that Republicans were doing this, criticizing their personal wealth. I mean, that's just so different from what Republicans do. And Ron Johnson pointed out very easily, very, very succinctly, that Republicans need to be in the process of encouraging and recognizing people's personal wealth, not making fun of it and say that it's a matter of scorn. And I think
that's an about face for you, Denise.
No,
wow.
But I'm telling you, it's not about face for me. I'm just repeating what other Republicans
if the wealthy person is a Democrat, it's okay.
I am just repeating what other Republicans have said is the wrong thing for them to be able to do. I think the part of the reason it backfired is that as people start to get to know things about Mary Burke, they know that Mary Burke is someone who is down to earth, who's very generous with the wealth that she does have, that supports a number of different things, including one of the largest foundations in the state that is doing things every day with personal wealth that the Burke family has earned through its hard work to improve the lives of people in this community. It's not like she's Millionaire Mary, which they now don't use anymore because it's backfired on them, to who's someone who's in touch with people. She's very much in touch with people. She's very much in touch with what people need, and it was a bad move, and that's part of the reason you're not seeing it on the air anymore.
I don't think anybody was surprised that Johnson said, hey, don't criticize somebody for being a millionaire business person.
He's
the cynic
too.
the cynic in me says that's the reason that he came out so forcefully at this time in the campaign, of which in a campaign where he's not a candidate, because in 2 years he will be a candidate and it will be an issue. And I think he wants to inoculate himself against any of those charges that right now are being leveled at Mary Burke. I'm disappointed that the Walker campaign took the ads down because, to be perfectly honest, it does show the hypocrisy of the Burke campaign to want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to run around the state saying, we support minimum wage hikes, we support having businesses taxed at a higher rate, but at the same time, they outsource those jobs because they want to take advantage of the lowest possible cost that they can generate off of those bikes when they sell them back here in the United States. And I think the other thing that's come out of all of this is just what has been her responsibility with that company. There's been, I think, far too many questions that have been unanswered by that campaign than there have been that are answered around those issues that she's generated in the first place. First, she says that she's been a leader in the company that has been involved in all of the critical decisions. And then when those critical decisions seem to have negative connotations, she backs off on it.
I wasn't there.
I had nothing to do with it. That wasn't my responsibility. Well, but it is true. And that's the problem that she has. And that's why they're sitting back on the sidelines now, happily listening to Ron Johnson criticize Governor Walker for leveling these charges against the rich who are running in races, utilizing their own money, but at the same time don't want to be held accountable for any decisions they make.
I would just say, without divulging too much that would be inappropriate, in the past, I have worked for an organization that did quite a bit of work with the Burkes and the Burke Foundation, and she is someone who was there at all points in time, certainly engaged and involved. So this idea that somehow she's saying, oh, I didn't, it's just not true. Again, it's a way of, and this really does disturb me, quite frankly, as a woman, where now suddenly there are questions about her leadership and what she did or didn't do that you didn't see, certainly at a level when you have other male candidates who have run companies.
Then you should.
But now, Denise, it's interesting that you would say that this is an issue of male versus female when you wouldn't acknowledge that in Clark's race it's an issue of a conservative who's African American against someone who's a white liberal.
That's not the issue.
But it is the issue. It is. Those things do. I'll acknowledge that Mary Burke has an issue. Well, she may be treated differently, but I do think that she's treated the way she ought to be treated as someone who's raised all these issues first in the campaign. She brought up that she was a successful business person. And then when people delved into why she's successful, she wants to run away from it because it doesn't follow the script they want people to have.
Success is not simply based on the fact that they are outsourcing some jobs. The success of that
99%.
Some jobs? 99.9%?
The success of that company is really based on the work that she, her brothers, and her fathers did over a period of years that still makes it one of the most successful companies in Wisconsin.
No denying.
So, to somehow hold her to what she has been held at is a different standard. I mean, millionaire Mary, come on.
Well, she's a millionaire. Her name is Mary.
All right.
She's also a successful businesswoman to marry. They did not for that, did they?
I hope you'll hold her. You say she's done so many great things for the company. I hope you will also hold her responsible for what she did under the Doyle administration that lost well over 100,000 jobs.
Just as I'm willing to hold the governor accountable for failing to come up with 250,000 jobs.
We can talk about that in the weeks ahead. I'd love to.
Shifting gears, we all know how incredibly slow Milwaukee moves to when it comes to most major projects, especially whenever government bodies are involved. So it was kind of surprising to hear the other day that the new owners of the Milwaukee Bucks, they want to have a site firmed up for a new arena in the next 3 or 4 months. I'm wondering who you think is going to have the most influence when it comes to where this new arena goes, or has that decision been made already?
That decision I don't think's been made, but I do think that there are a number of sites that, including last week when people began to speculate on this show, in fact, that maybe the location of the current Journal Sentinel might be a place where they would site it. My argument would be for either putting it in the valley or putting it down at the coach yards, which are adjacent to the Italian Community Center. Plenty of space close to the lakefront. That whole entertainment venue that you have running from Summerfest all the way back to the State Fairgrounds, I think would make it an ideal place where people are starting to already gravitate for entertainment. The people who want it downtown certainly don't have statistics on their side favorably when it comes to siting it downtown, because what's been shown is that when you put these facilities in places where hardly any other business is willing to gravitate towards it, it doesn't stimulate much economy. You have hotels down there, but how many people who go to Bucks games end up staying overnight in the hotels? You've got bars and restaurants that are down on Water Street, that are downtown along the Milwaukee Avenue, along Jefferson Street. Those places could just as easily run shuttle buses as many of the nightclubs do when they want to have people who travel to either Brewers games or they go to Bucks games, actually, as well, when they want to capture some of those customers. So I think there are all kinds of ways around making sure that you keep your business going if it is premised on having that crowd that's in that arena come back to your facility.
I'm getting the impression these are East Coast financial guys
Yes.
that are going to do things the way they want to do them,
They
not
certainly
the
have
way
so
that the
far.
Milwaukee power brokers want it done.
I think so. And I think we want to know where this arena is going to end up. We need to pay attention to where they're saying they want it, because I think that's what's precisely going to happen. Gerard, I think you're right. There's a possibility there at the Coach Yards to have a great entertainment complex. I don't think it stands a chance of getting there. I think the site right now that has a lot of people's interest really is that Journal Sentinel location.
Yuck.
I really do think that that's an opportunity. And it gives us an opportunity. Here's the problem we have. There probably is no perfect place for this at all. There's not going to be a place that's going to satisfy
better
everybody.
places.
There may very well be. But I think that the idea that this is going to be tied to what may be one of our best chances to actually have some redevelopment in our downtown area and to bring some life back to it is something that's really critical. I do think it has the opportunity for us to take a look at, perhaps, a way in which we can bring some new life back to that area. It is a more convenient location. It's, I think for most people, it has the potential to be a destination in and of itself with some additional economic development, as opposed to just kind of creating a string of entertainment complexes that may or may not be connected with activities that are going on. If you started the Coach Yards and worked at State Fair, the fact that you're not likely to have a continuum of things that are going to be going on in that area that will constantly draw people to it.
Because the Journal Sentinel site is in play, and because so much of the circulation of that newspaper depends on sports, the Packers and the Brewers and the Bucks, can we rely on the information we get from the Journal Sentinel to be accurate when it comes to this site selection?
If they have a dog in the fight, I mean, you have to take that into consideration. But that would be a horrible site. Not very far from the current Bradley Center, which has done nothing to create economic development or excitement in that particular area. We don't compare notes before we come on the show, but I agree that the Coach Yard site is ideal. As close as you can get to that jewel of a resource, Lake Michigan, I think that's great. You have the opportunity to build an entertainment district adjacent, just like they've done in St. Louis next to Busch Stadium. They have a stadium district right next to it with all kinds of flourishing activities and businesses. But the powers that are going to make the play here are the owners and the NBA. And just like Miller Park, you cannot tell an owner where he has to go or needs to go. He makes that he makes that decision, and I see as more sites are being thrown into the mix, as many as 8 to 10 now, I think it's going to complicate matters. No way is this resolved in 3 to 4 months.
Oh, I don't think so. I think that's a pipe dream at best. But then the question is, how does it really then begin to influence and play out on a site that eventually is selected when we look at the deadline that the NBA has given the new owners to come up with a new stadium?
It will take years
Right.
to pick a site.
All right, let's turn to the Middle East again, where the fighting between Israel and Hamas seems to have started up again as soon as that 72-hour truce expired. But the arguing never stops, including some pretty angry words recently between Israel and the United States. Rick Horowitz knows which side he's on. Rick?
I must have been out of the room when Benjamin Netanyahu was promoted to God, all-seeing, all-knowing, beyond criticism, beyond even questioning, at least by Americans. A dressing down, the papers called it. The U.S. government is, quote, not to ever second-guess me again about Hamas. That's what the Israeli prime minister reportedly told U.S. officials recently. And Israel hasn't denied it. They've tried to explain it, put it in context, but they haven't denied it. Don't ever second-guess me again, he said. Or else what? Israel will stop cashing our checks? Will stop firing our ammunition? Hardly. I know what it is. Or else Israel will pass the word to certain American Jewish leaders, to certain American Jewish organizations, that the U.S. government hasn't been good enough friends to Israel, by which they'll mean that this particular administration isn't marching in lockstep with this particular Israeli government about dealing with this particular crisis. And when those American Jewish leaders and organizations spread that word, the rest of us will, what? well, we might keep doing what we've been doing, thinking for ourselves, drawing our own conclusions about what's in America's best interests, even about what's in Israel's best interests. After all, it's not like the Israeli government has anything like a perfect record in dealing with Hamas or otherwise. Some of its decisions, in fact, some of its actions over the years have worked out terribly for Israel. Some of its decisions, my opinion, but not just my opinion, continue to be short-sighted, continue to exacerbate problems instead of calming them, let alone solving them. And the Israeli people certainly know that and have said that frequently, out loud, for decades. Not so much this time, but still. But now Mr. Netanyahu says Americans, or at least American officials, don't have a right to those kinds of opinions, don't have a right to express their concerns. Did I miss the part where America outsourced its foreign policy or its freedom of speech? Look, I hardly speak for all American Jews. Then again, neither does the Israeli government. Neither, for that matter, do those so-called Jewish leaders. We're funny that way. But speaking just for me, I don't take kindly to foreign governments dictating what my country's government can do or say. And I won't be guilt-tripped into thinking otherwise.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.